Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us today for this screening of 1984. Before we start the movie, I want to give you a little bit of context about the movie and how it relates to our present day. I'm Dr. Shannon Oltmann, Associate Dean and Director of the School of Information Sciences here at Wayne State University, and I study censorship and freedom of speech. We're watching this movie because it's Banned Books Week in the US. And I want to talk a little bit about book banning. Now, we might think this is something that only happens in other countries or something that happened a long time ago in our history. The truth, however, is more complicated. Public libraries and schools have had books challenged and removed recently, within the past several decades and especially within the past 4 years. Now, a challenge is when someone thinks a book should be removed because of what the book is about or because of the author's beliefs or actions. And then sometimes the book is actually removed, call that a book ban. It doesn't only affect libraries and schools, however. Publishers and authors have also been threatened because of the content of the books. And then authors and publishers have to stop and think, is it worth writing a book that has gay characters? Is it worth publishing a book about structural racism when those books may be challenged and protested by some people in communities? So these numbers come from the American Library Association, which collects data from libraries across the country. And you can see from these numbers that in 2021, censorship in the United States increased drastically. But it's increased every year since then through 2023. The numbers in 2024 have gone down a little bit, but I'm not sure that is cause for celebration because there's now actually legislation in a lot of states that prevents libraries from buying books that might be controversial. And some libraries just decide on their own to not buy those books. So maybe there are fewer books out there to be censored, which is not necessarily a victory, right? The other important thing to note about these numbers is these are only a small proportion of all book challenges and bans across the United States. So the numbers are probably actually much, much higher. Now let's talk about which books get banned and challenged. Over 80% of the books that are challenged have content about one of these three categories. It either contains queer content, what I call DEI content, which is about structural racism, injustice in the justice system, or it has themes, authors, or protagonists who are people of color. And then the third category is sexually explicit. And these are books that might have sex scenes, books about sex education. Even books that have kissing or foreplay are sometimes called sexually explicit. Now, one important thing to know about these three categories is that they're all legal. They're all protected by our freedom of speech. A book with a lesbian character, or a book with a Black, Hispanic, or Muslim character. Those are not illegal, but people are really uncomfortable with some of these ideas and some of these topics, and so they challenge the books anyway. Now you might be asking, what do book bans have to do with this film? How do we get from this background context of book bans to a movie about a dystopian conformist future? And dystopian here means really, really bad. It's the opposite of a perfect, happy, wonderful setting. Dystopian is just full of awfulness. And that's the kind of setting in this movie. The theme of Banned Books Week is censorship is so 1984. So let's talk about how these two topics relate. And by doing so, we'll think about the books that people want banned. Think about all of these books, for example. These are all recent children's books that feature same-sex parents. My Moms Love Me, Daddy and Dada have all these books contain families that either have two moms, two dads, or something like that. They're not illegal, but they have been challenged and banned in many libraries and schools across the United States. Why are people banning books like this? Why are people challenging books like this? Ultimately, it's because they think kids shouldn't read about families that have same-sex parents, families that have two moms or two dads. People who challenge these books want us to wipe same-sex families from public view and maybe even from history. They want to pretend they're not part of our society, not part of our reality. And so they want everyone to conform to their ideals of what a family should look like and what our lives should look like. And that's the connection to the movie 1984. Now, this is a book based on a book written by George Orwell in 1949, right after World War II. He had a lot of concern about the military and government working hand in hand with corporations to collect data, to generate profit, and to regulate humanity. He was really worried about state censorship, forcing conformity on people, and creating endless war. If you've ever heard of someone say, that's a really Orwellian approach, it comes from this guy's last name. Now, I will say the movie has some outdated technology and ideas about what future technology would look like. In 1949, he was trying to imagine what might happen 35 years in the future. The main character in this movie is Winston Smith, who works for the Ministry of Truth. Now, in this government department, they bend, erase, and manipulate the truth, as you'll see. And Winston starts to practice so-called thought crimes. Now, I'm not going to elaborate on that. You'll see how it unfolds in the movie, but keep that in mind, that his primary crime is his thoughts. Let's talk about parallels to contemporary society for a minute. And to do so, I want to start by talking about the events of January 6th, 2021, when Trump was supposed to hand over the reins of power to Joe Biden. And instead, people approached the Capitol building. Was this an attempted coup? Was it a riot? Simply a protest? Does it depend on who's telling the story? Does it depend on who's in power at a particular moment? Remember, the way that Trump describes those events is very different than the way Biden described those events. Does the story depend on who controls the media? Who controls what is going out to the public? Different media outlets describe these events very differently as well. It's not just January 6th, though. We can think about the murder of George Floyd in 2020. And by calling it murder, I've already put a particular spin on it, haven't I? What if I said the death of George Floyd or the accidental death of George Floyd? Those are very different ways of looking at the situation, very different forms of language to describe the same situation. Or think about the rise and spread of COVID-19, the virus's origins, how it was spread across different people, the wearing of masks, the shutdown of society and schools. The way that we talk about these incidents and this situation really varies from people to people. And right now, we're not forbidden from using certain words or approaches, but we could be. Think about the cancellation of comedians. Jimmy Kimmel Stephen Colbert, going back to dozens of others less well known. Now, some might say Jimmy Kimmel got his show back. He wasn't canceled after all. How do you portray it? How do you think about it? This really comes down to who controls language, who controls what we read, what books are in the libraries in the schools, who controls what we hear, what we say, what we post online, what we think. This poster comes from a 1996 campaign to get out the vote and to protest censorship movements back in the 90s. It's now housed in the Smithsonian Museum as a representation of political movements in the 90s. Censorship is un-American. Is it? Or is it very American? As you watch the movie, I want you to think about whether you see parallels to our current society. If you do, what can or should we do about that? How do we tackle those parallels? How do we respond to a lack of privacy, to surveillance, to attempted censorship? And do we care when it affects other people or only ourselves? The bottom line is we have to think about whether our present day is dystopian and will our future be dystopian? If we don't want a dystopian future, we need to make changes today. That's ultimately what this film is about. And I hope that I've given you some food for thought as you watch the movie now. Thank you.